Pixar has a problem that I don't think we talk about enough, especially with that horrible statement they made about sequels in the state of Pixar. If this isn't fixed within the next couple of years, Pixar may never be the same again. But this problem all truly began in 2006 with the release of Cars 2. Being only 4 years after the Disney acquisition, this movie is one of the first big sequel movies that have really flopped in the eyes of the fans. I think nowadays a lot of people like Cars, but most people think that the first movie is not that great. But everybody unanimously agrees that Cars 2 is just a real stinker of a film, and most people don't like it at all. And you can see why. The first movie is a fairly interesting story about this rich high-time car coming to this old town and learning how to humble himself and be a better person. And then Cars 2 is about spies and everything. Like, it isn't even a story about Mater becoming more competent or more interesting. He's just kind of a doofus that has an entire movie. And spies just come out of nowhere and have nothing to do with anything about Cars 1 or anything about the cars. It's literally about fucking racing because they're cars. So it's like, what is even the point? It's very similar to how Planet Sheen came out afterwards of Jimmy Neutron. It's like, oh, let's have the sequel show be an entire thing about this comedy character running an entire show with none of the reasons why the original thing was good. Like, the reason the original Cars could have any merit to it was how it can be really heartfelt sometimes. And Mater was still kind of funny, and I will not deny that.
He won 3 piston cups.
He did what in his cup?
He did one in his cup. I love that line. I literally love that line. So saying that that's bad is really annoying to me. Grr. Angry. He did 2 years later in 2013, Monsters University. This movie being an actual prequel film to Monsters Inc. And compared to most sequels that have no point of being there, like we'll talk about later in this video, this one is very much kind of good and is kind of underrated in some sort of ways. Like, it's definitely not as good as the original, and I think most of the reasons people like it are for reasons other than why we like the original movie. But there's enough video essays that I've watched that talked about the good aspects of it that my opinions kind of changed on it. But definitely when I first watched it back when I was 12, since this was 2013, I was very much not impressed. I thought it was okay, but I kind of like didn't like most of the points and thought the movie was kind of boring. And then right after Monsters University, 3 years later in 2016 was Finding Dory. And just like Monsters University, when this movie came out, I thought it was not that great. It had a lot of just nothing to it, and the one thing that everybody agrees is just kind of good about it is the final scene. But that's just kind of because of how Pixar has been repeating this exact same process with every single one of their movies. Ever since they started getting a lot of traction with Up and different movies having like one emotional big scene, they've been doing it for like every single movie. They have it with Monsters University, did it with Toy Story, they did it with Toy Story 4, they did it with so many different movies. So of course they did it with Finding Dory, which is the only reason we talk about the movie, the beautiful final scene of like all the shells leading back, and it's like, oh, it's so sad, it's so depth, and it's what the movie was building towards. But everything else is just kind of whatever. The comedy isn't great, people going back on their character, I'm so sick of it. Just like Incredibles 2, it does that exact same thing. We'll get to that in a second. But Incredibles 2 with Mr. Incredible, it kind of goes back on some shit, and different characters just have like bad character writing by going backwards, but I can talk about that later. Finding Dory, it's just very like, what are you doing? Like, the comedy isn't good throughout the entire movie, characters are bad, but it has that one final scene that's really good. That one scene in the climax that's really good and really sad. And it's like, does that save the movie? I don't think it does. It can't, like, one scene cannot make a movie like worth it like that. It's not worth going through all that other movie that is just less good and not anything like that scene, and to get to one scene that is good, you know? It's like Up. It's like the exact opposite of what some people say about Up. Some people that don't like Up say, people only like the movie because the opening is good. And it's like, I like the movie despite that. I think it's okay, but definitely the opening is like one of the best parts of the movie, and it's so much better than the movie. But something that's really good about it is that it's at the beginning of the movie and sets up the plot of the movie and like brings it in. So like, seeing the rest of the movie, you're like, oh, this all relates to that. The house represents the intro. Getting to that cliff represents the intro, you know? And also it's a movie about an old guy like driving his house around on a balloon, so it's like, oh, so good. But Finding Dory is at the very end of it, so now you just have this scene of being like, who cares? But the people that say that about Up, it's like, do you also think Finding Nemo's opening is like, oh, that's the best part because it's a sad part at the beginning of the movie? Like, no, it's good with everything else too. But Finding Dory, basically, Just not that great. And then Cars 3 in 2017 was one of those movies that I never really saw, but I hear people talk about it being kind of mid to boring, but it's definitely better than Cars 2, so that's a bit of a plus. And I do love that it does give kind of an end to the trilogy, to where the second movie kind of ruined it to make it seem like there's not going to be any other movies. Cars 3 is like attempting to do Shrek Forever After for a franchise that never had a Shrek 2, so it's like, it ends up just kind of being a trilogy of not that much. Again, I don't have many strong opinions about Cars 3, but I think that's kind of the problem. And those are all unneeded or not that good sequels after Disney bought them in 2006. And I'll say that'll be that era of films. In the next era, I will call the real stink era. And that one has Incredibles 2, released in 2018, and this movie. There's loads of videos about this movie in particular and why they're bad. Even Shrefferless's first big video that got him into making videos was a 5-minute video about Incredibles 2. But everything about this movie is so much worse than the original. And speaking of Shrefferless, he said that Ratatouille was the magnum opus of Pixar. I honestly think that I like Incredibles the most out of everything. I'll call it the superhero magnum opus to just call it a little bit different, but that movie is so incredible. I love how it has a superhero world that has realistic like family life and interaction. The world building of it being just like a really simple world of like these people have powers and then they had lawsuits so they're not there anymore. And then just every single character, the villain is an incredible villain that has billions of video essays as well. All the kids have such unique points. The comedy is on point. So many statements from it are so iconic. Syndrome is the funniest fucking guy around and has a cute dork laugh. But then Incredibles 2. The Incredibles 2 starts off with the Underminer from the previous film. It makes you be like, oh, this movie's going to continue right afterwards. It's going to be as good. And then you start watching more of it and you're like, this is kind of boring. And then when it's not boring, it just makes no sense. Like, so they want particularly Elastigirl to go out and fight crime, so they basically try to have the opposite of what the dad and mom had in one. So Mr. Incredible is now at home being a homebody while she's out there being superhero stuff, which isn't that bad of an idea, but it seems like it was entirely done just to do the opposite shit. Because Mr. Incredible being at home has no real character arc to it that has any sort of weight. All the home life is a lot more cartoony than before, is so much more unrealistic in comparison. There's subplots that you don't really care about the different kids. Just that one screenshot of Violet spewing milk out of her nose is so gross. Oh man, the main plot. I was really into the movie. I really thought it was interesting. I thought some shit was like not that great, but then I was watching the movie and I was having a good enough time, and the villain looked kind of cool. Screenslaver being don't look at your phone. It could have been don't look at your phone's type of name, but instead it's like trying to be like this weird political superhero thing that is like trying to be interesting. It's trying to be like unique. It's trying to bring up stuff about superheroes that is interesting to talk about, like the first movie does all of the time. But instead of doing all that, they do a twist reveal to be this girl, which, first of all, in the first movie, the twist of Syndrome being the boy isn't said to be this big twist moment. Like, it's so easy to go into it that it's more of just like seeing this guy again. He's such a different person that you don't really see it as a twist villain, because you see him as a boy, you kind of just see his origin without seeing him for the rest of the life. So, and then when you see him, he's funny and intelligent and so like interesting. He has so much charisma that it envelops the viewer into really enjoying his character in just the first scene of him being reintroduced. But this character, they just, like, how did they write it like this? Like, everybody's talked about this to death, but I have to talk about it since I'm reviewing it, you know? So it's like, so her dad, all right, her dad, right? Instead of going into her safe and having the phone to the superheroes in the safe, he instead calls the superheroes to go and do that. So she hates superheroes, all right? But that background is like kind of stupid. It's like, oh, why don't you just have the phone in the safe? Why do you choose that? But either way, doesn't matter. The main point of it is that he chose superheroes over trying to preserve himself. Having a superheroes around makes people not have their self-preservation as much because they're just depending on the superheroes to save them or something like that, right? And that's interesting enough. That could be an interesting point. But then the way she does it, the way she does it. So her plan was to have superheroes be legalized again. Like, she went through all the process. Like, the beginning of this film, they are still illegal. You cannot be a superhero anymore. So what she decides to do with that knowledge is make superheroes legal again, which she somehow formulated in just a couple of days after the previous one. So it's just like a Megamind 2 situation to where like it's even worse knowing the time difference, being like, oh, this is set literally just days after the previous one. So the fact that all this happened is kind of ridiculous. She plans all that, that with her brother. She's on his own shit, just trying to get her legalized. And then her plan is to have at this meeting where they're about to sign everybody to be legalized, she's going to hypnotize these people to be bad so they are never brought back again. And it's like, what? What do you mean? Like, you could see how this idea plan could be formulated to a point of being interesting or clever. Like, if they did something a little bit different, or something, or I mean a lot different because it's really bad, but the way they do it is just so unclever and stupid. Here's the thing about me that I hate about things is hypnotization, because hypnotizing characters when literally all it is taking every single bit of their willpower and enforcing your own willpower. There isn't little like, oh, you're hypnotizing them, so they have to have a little bit inside them that would believe that to be the case. It's like, oh, hypnotize you to go punch this person, but that means you literally wanted to punch that person before you were hypnotized. It just removes some of the extra thoughts that you need to go to do that action. Like, those type of hypnotizations are good, but these ones are literally just evil. Like, they just strap them on their helmet and they're just evil, and then they go after everybody. And it's like, oh, but the homebody part and the superhero part are both being combined again, just like the first film. But they don't combine in an interesting way. The first film has Elastigirl go out herself to help out Bob on his fucking trip because something weird is going on her own intuition. And it ends with interesting scenes, like the scene of her just like flying an airplane and him thinking that she died, and then having those different interactions with the characters. Instead with this one, it's just him and the kids are trying to defend against them, and then the kids are all survive because they're kids and they can't get hurt or hypnotized or anything. And Mr. Incredible gets hypnotized. And they have a scene being like, oh, isn't it crazy that he's manipulating her? Evil Mr. Incredible going against good Elastigirl. And it's like, that's just stupid because it doesn't mean anything. If it had like he actually hated her a little bit or had some resentment and that's where it's coming from, and then she could talk him out of it, that would have been at least a little bit interesting, and have it be a character moment instead of just nothing, because it is literally just nothing. It has no realism, it has no stakes. Even by the end of the movie, Violet says she's rich and just can get it out anyway. It's like, yeah, but don't say that in your movie. It's like, this movie made it to where this franchise, like, everybody doesn't want a third film because this movie was so debated and highly, like, bad. Like, obviously, I know some people like it because it's definitely more of a Monsters University than a Cars 2, but the movie is just so bad in so many ways, and it's just such a downgrade. It is the Shrek the Third of the series, and it's so much so that it's like, the fact that you would think the opposite is kind of ridiculous, in my opinion. In my YouTuber opinion, in my 1K sub YouTuber opinion, this movie bad, and it's weird for you to like it. Okay, let's move on to the next one, because I think I might make a video about this more at some point, because I didn't realize how much I had to talk about it, and there's definitely a lot more I could do after rewatching it more. But let's just go straight to Toy Story 4. Toy Story 4 released in 2019, a year before everything went downhill for a lot of different reasons. But it's a movie that was okay. Everybody thought it was alright. Everybody usually thought it was either okay or they thought it was whatever. Nobody really thought it was too good. Because I think the original 3 movies were very good movies, and Toy Story 3 is really good send-off. And I think Toy Story 4 has good finale scene and has good interesting thoughts to talk about. It's not like Incredibles 2 to where it has like nothing interesting to say about the world of what's going on. Toy Story 4 is instead about Woody and his stuff. And it sometimes cuts to Buzz for no reason, and his plot is a lot worse and doesn't need to be in the movie at all. But everybody likes Toy Story 4 for being a finale to Woody, and he's leaving now. Something that literally everybody said was, okay, now this is the last movie, guys. Because if there's another movie after this, then it's like, what are you doing? How can you have 2 finale films in a row and then do a 5th movie? Which they are. And in the promotional art, you see Woody in the room with them. So it's like, did Toy Story 4 happen? What's going on with that? Was it just concept art? Did they just get a new Woody? And it's one of those things that you just think about and you're like, yeah, this movie was okay, but it just kind of didn't need to happen. It's one of those things where this movie probably would have been better for it not having come out, because Toy Story 3 is just a better whole movie. Toy Story 2, Toy Story 1, they're better full movies. Toy Story 4 is more of a good movie at certain points. It has good scenes with Woody and emotional stuff, but literally everything else is just kind of boring or just not that great. And the next era after the real sync one, I would say, is the not movie theater times for Pixar, where Disney said, you know what, you guys are going to go on the streaming service. You're going to go into Disney Plus. So we had Onward, Soul, Luca, and Turning Red all going onto the streaming services, and at least much later in theaters. But then the first movie back to theaters was Lightyear. And I have this one comment that was trying to defend it on one of my videos. Unpopular opinion, I thoroughly enjoyed Lightyear. I did not care for or about the terrible gay stuff. I did not care about scientific accuracy. I did not much care that they made Buzz the stick in the mud that he is. I think Lightyear did alright. It wasn't great. I understand why people don't like it, but I do. You are wrong! But I think this movie is not good. And it's so much so that I never want to see it again ever. It's one of those movies that's so boring, and unlike how I said with Finding Dory, with how it's Finding Dory is saved a bit by the ending by having like a pretty good scene, Lightyear is the opposite of that, to where it has a scene that ruins the entire movie and just the entire franchise in general. It makes no sense for Lightyear to be like this. As a twist villain that makes no sense, and its entire movie is just entirely just boring. It has a dry characters, nothing I think is that interesting, and then the ending. So it's like the twist villain. And it's like, you could just have a really cool Zurg. He was kind of threatening, had like cool lighting and big power and everything. And then you have the ending to where we just, spoiler alert, is Buzz Lightyear from an alternate reality, but the future, but also an alternate reality. And it's just like, not only does this not make sense for the toys and Toy Story to have toys to be like that, but it's just like, man. And then 2 years afterwards of Lightyear was the statement, the one I alluded to at the beginning of this video, if you don't remember. This statement completely ruined a lot of people's willingness to give Pixar a chance. And let me just say it real quick, just so everybody's on the same page, because this statement was so bad that it made everybody go, oh no, Pixar is going so off the deep end. That is bad. Just like I talked about in the DreamWorks problem video with them making that one statement that completely made their company seem like, oh no, they're never going to make a good movie again, likely. So it's like, oh no. So in the quote, it says, after Lightyear lost millions of dollars in 2022 and Elemental had Pixar's worst ever opening weekend performance the following year, quote unquote, there was a real and intense period of self-scrutiny and feeling like we messed up in some way, quote, Lightyear said. Executives hosted post-mortems to determine how to revitalize the studio, he recalls. They arrived at mentoring Pixar's upcoming directors to focus less on autobiographical tales. Luca had been inspired by his director's childhood in Italy, Turning Red by his director's relationship with their mother. And Elemental, which did gain some momentum overseas and online, by its director's immigrant family. Pixar would instead develop concepts with clear mass appeal, many of which, in the case of sequels and spin-offs, had already been proven. The studio's movie should be less a pursuit of any director's catharsis and instead speak the commonality of experience, Doctor says. Quote, I don't think we can ever let ourselves off the hook of making sure that we deliver the best possible and most relatable films. So, this has a lot of points, so I'm going to go through different parts of it. And one of the things that it's saying is individual creators shouldn't have a voice and instead have broad appeal. Like, dude, Inside Out is the only movie with that broad of an appeal. Because everybody has emotions. Like, what older iconic movies wouldn't be greenlit just because of this tone of decision? Like the directors of Incredibles included the director's family life. Finding Nemo with the dynamic of father and son coming from the same thing. And then Up, an old man with a dead wife. That is not broad appeal to especially children. It honestly seems like what they're saying is that movies like Turning Red, Soul, Luca, and Elemental wouldn't be greenlit because of them not being an American white culture elements and instead being literally anything else. In which all of those movies were not released in theaters until a year or two later and still did better than Lightyear. Like, despite that comment or what many fans say, Lightyear still bombed. The article even talks about how Elemental did pretty well by eventually finding its audience. Even my wife liked Elemental. And Elemental literally got twice the amount of money than Lightyear. But I guess what they mean is more actual like number sequels than spin-offs like Lightyear. They're thinking of movies like Toy Story 5 and not movies like Lightyear or Woody Roundup or something like that. They're thinking of movies that are not spin-offs and instead are actual sequels. So, you know, a lot of people, including myself, complain about that line because of the Lightyear. I believe that doesn't relate to each other, so we shouldn't critique it that much. There's still a lot to critique. Don't worry. Don't worry, there's still a lot of critique. Which the only other one that can count as that beforehand was the underrated Monsters University, which is an actual prequel and not a prequel to an in-universe fictional story character that has nothing to do with the Toy Story franchise. That the prequel even makes the story make even less sense with there's Star Wars references in Toy Story 2. Like, he says, I am your father. No, bitch, I am you. The toys have personalities based off of the art that goes into it, right? Like, if it's a toy from a movie, then it's based on that. So he would not indeed be a father, like a Star Wars reference, and he would instead be him. He would instead literally be Buzz Lightyear, but from the future, and the toy would believe that he's Buzz Lightyear from the future, making this movie literally not even able to fucking... Oh, that might also be another video, because I could just go off on that for so long. And then the next point, how anti-art the statement is. Like, just like I said in my Dreamers Problem video, they also had a similar statement that spelled the end for the studio, being statements that make it seem like we're not going to have art, we're not going to have directors put their artistic vision into things, where they're going to just be sequels and sequels to things, even if they're less good, like Megamind or Kung Fu Panda. I recommend you go watch that video if you care about any DreamWorks movies, especially for the new Shrek 5 that's going to be coming out. But both of them talk about so much about how just anti-art the industry is. And we all know that. We all know that the industry is very anti-art, but just seeing it spelt out in clear English, the directors of these companies just knowing that they're intentionally snuffing artists, even if it has no actual reason. Elemental did so good. Elemental was a hit success. Did so good, and yet they decided just to not do anything else with it. Like, just because these movies aren't about like white American people, the question is why snuff the artists? Why snuff the artists when the movies you make do that? Like, I don't understand. Something I'll never understand about especially companies nowadays is how they spend so much time trying to get a quick buck instead of just trying to make money in the future. Like, you know what makes more money in the future is making a good flippin' film. Like, people go to the theater for a good film from a good franchise. If you make 3 bad movies in a row, you have literally no other money you can make from that franchise because nobody's watching the movies because of that. You've led yourself to the point where nobody's going to watch the movie because of how bad it is. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish made so much money, not just because of being from this franchise, but because of it being a really good movie, to the point where people don't even realize it's a sequel to a comparatively mid film of Puss in Boots 2011. But then after this statement was released was Inside Out 2, released in the year of our Lord 2024. And this movie did pretty good. And people liked it. People thought it was a really good movie, and I personally haven't seen it yet, but I believe that this movie is good, considering literally everybody talks about it, about how it's so good and everybody loves it. But it doesn't really matter about how good it is, because they're going to see this. They're going to see the fact that this movie did good, and they're going to go, yes, sequels was the right way to go. It's like, no, sequels were not the right way to go. It's not the fact it's a sequel, it's the fact it's a good movie. People don't just care about sequels to things, they just care about a good movie. The Dark Knight isn't one of the most famous movies of all time because it's a sequel to Batman Begins. It's because The Dark Knight is one of the best movies ever fucking made. Like, what? And I love that people love Inside Out 2, and I love to see the film show Riley just grow up over time, becoming eventually an old lady, and continuously seeing these emotions throughout the life of an entire human being. I think that would be one of the most artistically interesting film franchises that I would ever see, but I don't think that'll ever happen, because as soon as she gets to college, that'll be the final movie. But it's like, if Up could be one of the top films from Pixar, then I think the Inside Out franchise should get to the point where they can be old, you know? But that's all a sign up, because it doesn't really matter. Because 2 years later, in 2026, it's going to be Toy Story 5. They've already announced it. They're showing all the previous characters, and now they're going against Wi-Fi. Honestly, it really triggers me a bit to see that. Because even though people use that word a lot, it literally like makes me get flashbacks to Wreck-It Ralph 2, which is one of those films that wasn't on this list because that was Disney and not Pixar, but it's part of the same problem. Wreck-It Ralph 2, Frozen 2, a bunch of those sequels movies and live action movies all have the same problem of being just really nothing and having terrible problems. The sequels are better than the live action ones because the live action is just nothing, it's just repeating the same thing. But the sequels also ruin some of the movie franchises to be like, dang, I don't even want a new movie because of how bad they did the second movie. Like, how are these movies doing worse than the VHS spin-offs from all the way back in the day with Little Mermaid 2 and Cinderella 3: A Twist in Time, one of the best sequel movies I've ever seen from Disney. One of the best straight-to-DVD sequels I've ever seen from Disney. And then, somewhere in the future, it's going to be Incredibles 3. And this is the one I want to leave the video off on, is talking about Incredibles 3, because I love Incredibles. It's one of my favorite movies from Pixar ever. It's literally my favorite movie from Pixar, and I don't want the third movie to happen. Which is actually crazy. The fact the company can get so bad and the sequel can be so bad, both of those combined can make it happen to where I don't want a sequel to one of my favorite films ever to exist. It's kind of crazy, and the fact that that's the case is fucking nuts. It's exactly the exact same I said with DreamWorks. Like, I love Kung Fu Panda, I love Shrek, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish is one of my favorite movies, Shrek 2 is one of my favorite movies, Shrek Forever After I think is underrated and amazing. But I believe that all these movies franchises are just gonna go into the dirt. Like Incredibles 2 felt like a slap to the face, in the same way of Megamind 2, but obviously not as bad as Megamind 2 because that was just a TV show. But the thing is that Incredibles 3 is going to talk about Incredibles 2 happening. It's going to have moments from it. It's probably going to pick up from the ending somewhat because that's their plan for the franchise. They're just going to keep doing that for every movie. I do pray, I really do pray that it'll be good. And the fact that Inside Out 2 was so good makes me hope that Toy Story 5 and Incredibles 3 will be good. But this literally feels like the repeat of Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. It's like, oh, Inside Out 2 was so good. Can't wait for the next movies to be good. Oh, Toy Story 5 and Incredibles 3? Just like how we did with Kung Fu Panda 4 and Megamind 2. He said Megamind 2 we didn't really get excited for because the trailers were bad, but just the idea of it was exciting. And Kung Fu Panda 4, we hoped it was good, and then it just wasn't. Like, as I always say, I really hope that these movies will be good, and we should all have a group prayer right now to hope that it happens, but the likelihood is just so low, and I'm sick of saying it because it's exactly what I said for the DreamWorks problem video, but for a shorter video because I wanted to get this one out. Because I don't want to do a long video like the DreamWorks problem and then get like 10 views on it, like how it got. It's really disappointing to see companies and franchises just completely get ruined. It's just like, well, that's it, I guess. What happened to making good movies? Like, what happened to it? What happened to it? I really miss it. Like, there's just so many movies that are just kind of whatever that come out, and it has a problem with the contentifying of media in general. The contentifying that started with the MCU and then bled into other things, but really even in the MCU it started happening after Endgame, to where they had TV shows, they had animated TV shows, they had movies come out like every year, and they had all these things happening, and every company followed it afterwards, to the point where even DreamWorks has like an opening scroll, just like how Marvel does. I had a whole part about that in the DreamWorks problem video. Go check that out, please, if you care at all. And I do think we could have good stuff again, and I really do. But dang, it's really hard to have a consistency with a video, have a conclusion to something like this when it's so up in the air. Because this video is mainly made because of that statement. I wanted to give my quick review of all these different movies, talk about the statement, and talk about the future movies that are going to come out. And the statement was the main thing of just like how incredibly bad it is. Like, this is an awful problem. These are all awful problems, and I call it the awful sequel problem because unlike DreamWorks, they make some other good movies in between those, like Soul and Elemental, but like, it's a sequel problem because there's a problem that they're only focusing on sequels to things that have already done good in the past. And it's like, I am okay with that. I would love for just infinite of these movies that are just like good. I like Toy Story 10, give me it if it's good. Shrek 20, give me all those movies if it's good, right? If they write a good enough story. They don't even have to follow on each other, just like have it make sense and have each movie story be like good and then somewhat impactful, have it be funny throughout, and have it be interesting. But it's just like, movies don't do that all the time, and especially these movies don't always do that. Inside Out 2, people liked it, but how much is that being accidentally amazing, like Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, and then the next movies are not going to be that as good? And I mean accidentally amazing as in it's a fluke in comparison to how everything else isn't that good. And that's really all I have to say. See you later. Also, if you guys can comment down below what videos you want me to make, then that would be very helpful. I enjoy hearing your comments, and tell me what your favorite stuff I make is, so that way I can do more things. That I can do more things of what you like, because I care more about getting something that you guys like than just making things, period.